Hello, this is Truman, and here's another great verse for today. It's Revelation 3:8. I've set before you an open door that no man can shut. Now, we shared yesterday with the Apostle Paul, having God direct him by closing a door, closing another door, and then opening the door as he went into Macedonia. Do you know that God can direct our life from closed doors to open doors? I was asking the Lord to open the door for me to pastor again. I was on staff at a particular time in my life in ministry, and I'd had no churches contact me at all about becoming their pastor. I was praying, oh God, open the door that I might pastor. I was sitting in a restaurant, and across the way I could hear two pastors talking. And one was rejoicing that a church had just called him to be their pastor. I was feeling somewhat sorry for myself, and I said, Lord, have you forgotten me? I was reading 1 Samuel that particular morning, and I was reading about Hannah and how God shut Hannah's womb. Well, as I read that, it was like God was saying, I'm the one that has shut the door on churches contacting you. And then I kept praying and praying, and I said, Lord, I'll just surrender, and I'll be content where I am, in the place you've put me. As I continued to read, I then read how God opened Hannah's womb to give birth to the prophet Samuel. Now, the application that God seemed to make to me was this: I've now opened the door for you to pastor. I've opened the womb. Well, I was so filled with joy and peace that God had spoken to me and answered this prayer that I closed my Bible and drove home and said to my wife, Connie, as I came in the door, Connie, God has given us a pastorate. She said, did someone call you? I said, no one's called me. She said, well, how do you know? And I told her the story about how God made application as I prayed over God shutting Hannah's womb, then opening Hannah's womb. Do you know, within a few hours, I got a phone call, and it was the chairman of a personnel committee searching for a pastor. And this particular brother said, we've been looking for over 2 years for a pastor. And someone gave us your name, and we'd like to come and hear you preach this Sunday. Are you preaching anywhere this Sunday? And I said, yes, I am. And he came with his team, his committee, and they heard me preach. Well, from the time he called me on the phone, I knew that God had opened that door. In fact, I preached on the story of the barren womb and God opening Hannah's womb to give Samuel to God's ministry. Well, I knew that God opened that door. It was only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, and my wife and I had moved to that church. We knew that God had opened that door. There are times that God closes doors because He has more for us to learn. And then there's the moment that God opens a door. Now, what we should not do, we should not try to force the door open, but wait for God to open the door. Another great verse for today. God indeed closes doors, and He opens doors. Be sensitive to the Spirit's working in your life.